Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this 30-minute webinar brought to you by the Working Well service. My name's Kevin Moore, and I'm one of the Working Well consultants. And over the next half an hour, I'd like to go through a range of topics concerning mental health in the workplace, from your legal obligations as an employer through to some really helpful resources that you can bring into your business. And I'd like to start by looking at some headline stats to hammer home the point that we need to change. First of all, the labour force survey tells us that pre-lockdown, 17.9 million working days were lost each year in this country due to stress, anxiety, or depression. And when those absences happen, they're not short absences. The average length of absence is 21.6 working days. So that's about a month at a time. My third statistic for you shows how people aren't willing to talk about their mental health. Here it is. A 2017 survey by Time to Change suggested that just 13% of people would be comfortable talking about their mental health issues at work. In fact, when that survey was done, it indicated that people were more willing to talk about their money worries and their sex life than their mental health challenges. My final statistic before I move on is around stigma and discrimination. 1 in 4 people think that someone with a mental health issue shouldn't have the same rights to a job as everyone else. So let's have a look at the 2 legal obligations that all employers have that relate to mental health. And the first covers all staff because it covers the subject of stress. Under the Management of Health and Safety at Work regulations, all employers are responsible for all aspects of their staff's well-being, which therefore includes their mental health, and stress then comes fully into focus. Now, most people are aware of physical risk assessments done for health and safety purposes. Not so many people are aware that stress risk assessments should be carried out as well. And there's a fundamental difference between a physical and a psychosocial risk assessment. Let me show you what that is. When you think of the process of a physical risk assessment, you're really looking at 3 things. First of all, where is there a hazard? Something that has the potential to hurt someone. Once we know what the hazard is, we then consider what's the risk of that hazard hurting someone. And once we've established those, we also look at, if that was to happen, what impact might it have on the person. So that's a physical risk assessment. The key difference with stress risk assessments is the hazard is automatically there. Stress exists in the workplace, and therefore the focus should be on risk and impact. It's worthwhile just focusing on what we mean by the word stress for a moment. There are many different definitions. The one we like to use is it's the feeling of being under pressure. And one of the reasons why we like that definition is because it emphasizes that stress isn't necessarily a bad thing. We can all think of times when we've pulled it out of the fire because of a looming deadline or a target. So the word stress is actually a neutral word, but it gets misused. When people say that they're really stressed, they never say it in a positive context. We do actually have a word in our language for, specifically, bad stress. We all know it. That word is distress. So those people really should be saying, I'm really distressed at the moment. We also have a word for good stress. But in my experience, hardly anybody knows this word exists. And the word is eustress. Why does this matter? Well, if we consider the workplace, We can look at why something might be stressful or distressful. And we have a graphic on screen here that shows me at work, and the yellow circle represents my life at the moment. And it's a pretty good life. I'm within my boundaries, I'm feeling comfortable. In fact, if pushed, I'm capable of taking on more. And that green circle is what we call our comfort zone. So if you delegate a task to me, which I perceive I've got the time, the resources, etc., to be able to carry out the task, then it's most likely going to be a stressful experience for me. If, however, you give me a task that I perceive I haven't got those things, you take me out of that comfort zone, it becomes distressful. And what's really critical there is that a couple of times I use the word perceived, because someone's perception of their situation is just as important as the facts. So I'm going to show you a simple 5-step tool you can use when thinking about delegating tasks to people and setting their workloads. And we call it the RIST approach. The 5 factors to consider before delegating a task. The W is well-being. And on the left in the green square, you can see what good well-being looks like. If someone's in the red zone, it's more likely to be distressful. The R is resources. Do I have the tools and the people around me that I need to get the job done? If so, stressful. If not, or I perceive I don't, distressful. The I is importance or interest. If I see it as important, if I'm interested by it, I'm far more likely to want to do it. Therefore, it's more likely to be stressful. And you can see the opposite applying on the right. The S. Do I have and do I perceive that I have the skills needed to get it done? And finally, T. Do I have the time to be able to take this task on? So next time you're looking to hand someone a task, ask yourself, for those 5 areas, are they in the green or the red? And where does that person perceive they are, green or red? But now let's move on to the second legal obligation. And where stress affects every member of staff, the second legal obligation is around people whose mental health issue might be classed as a disability. Under the Equality Act 2010, there are 9 protected characteristics. Anyone in the minority in any of these areas is at a greater risk of stigma and discrimination. So the Equality Act provides protection for them. And you can see at the top of my pile there, one of the 9 is disability. So then we have the critical question of when might someone's mental health issue go from being a health issue to a disability under the Act. The Equality Act defines a disability as something that has a long-term, significant impact on someone's ability to carry out everyday tasks. So just thinking about that for a moment. What do we mean by long-term? It's been going on for at least a year, and or it's expected to last at least another year. And it has a significant impact on everyday tasks. That might be things like communicating with other people, managing time, using transport. So if someone's mental health issue does meet that criteria, or it has done in the past, if they disclose it to you, you are required to make reasonable adjustments. Now, it's a phrase that gets used a lot, reasonable adjustments, but most people, when they think of them, think about what resources can I supply to help that person at work. maybe a specialist chair for a bad back, a large screen for eyesight issues, an ergonomic keyboard. But reasonable adjustments go beyond just resources. So if someone does disclose a disability to you, yes, think of any resources and ask them what might work for them, but also consider, are there any changes to the role that are reasonable that might help the person to succeed? That might be changes in targets, in duties, etc. Are there any flexibilities within their working hours? That might include flexi time, it might include changing their hours, increasing breaks or frequency of breaks. And are there any changes to the physical working environment that might help? That could be working from home some or all of the time. That could be having a desk away from the main throng of people. So what tweaks that are reasonable could be made to ensure that the person can succeed despite their disability. And I've put the graphic of the person at the middle because let's always have the human being in the middle of the process. And let's start by asking them, what helps? Now that we've looked at legal obligations for employers, let's see what the official government guidance is. First of all, the Health and Safety Executive have some really good materials to help with stress management. There's an overarching page, the Stress Management Standards, which includes the Stress Management Toolkit, and some really useful tips for how to carry out stress risk assessments. In terms of the Equality Act, you'll notice there a link to a whole bunch of guides, which are really good quick reads, very specific subjects. So if you browse that page, find the subjects relevant to your organisation and make sure that you're up to date with your knowledge, please. And then the final link on this page, the Thriving at Work report, which was specifically looking at mental health in the workplace. And that report includes the 6 core standards that it's recommended all organisations comply with. Clearly, the last couple of years with COVID and lockdown have created a massive shake-up of the world of work. So we're now in a unique point in time where we really should be looking at how things are done and questioning what's the best way to move forward. And if we look at this biaxial model for a moment, we can consider how to optimise the world of work. If we plot out staff well-being and business productivity on these 2 axes, we end up with 4 quadrants, with the top right being the sweet spot. Everybody wins, a high-performing company with a happy workforce. We have our 2 amber zones. We might have a happy workforce but low productivity, or good productivity but an unhappy workforce and high staff turnover. Neither of the ambers, of course, are ideal. And then the red zone, poor productivity, poor staff well-being, a quadrant to absolutely avoid. So what are some of the factors to consider to move us up and move us right? Well, from a productivity point of view, staff are most productive when the world of work is accessible to them, where they have good access to the tools needed to do the job, and distractions are minimized or eliminated. Where they have access to you, to other support above, alongside and below them. Where their role can be measured to ensure that it is effective and contributing to productivity, and increasingly with flexibilities being introduced, that role has a transparency, that those who have, for instance, reasonable adjustments, there is an overt rationale for it. In terms of moving to the right of the quadrant, some of the factors to consider. Staff want a safe work environment. Now, pre-COVID, if we were thinking about a safe work environment, we'd probably be thinking about physical risks. but obviously we now also consider biological risks such as viruses so much more. Convenience. If we look back over lockdown, a lot of people stopped commuting, either working from home or furloughed. And for many, they realised how much they disliked the commute. Sociality is always an interesting factor to consider. Some people are perfectly happy in their own company. Other people need to be around others. So really getting a handle on the individual needs of that member of staff is crucial if we're going to positively impact their well-being. For some people, working from home is a horrendous thought, where they're starved of the sociality that they desire. And finally, work-life balance, not just in its traditional sense of making sure that we end our work and get on with life outside of work hours, but also that we can carry out our life responsibilities, such as caring responsibilities. So all factors to consider so that your organisation can find its sweet spot. For the final part of today's webinar, I'd like to introduce you to 4 resources that might be of use to your organisation, and I'll walk you through each one briefly. First of all, the Mayor's Good Work Standard. You may be asking which mayor, and the answer is the Mayor of London. This is a scheme where any London-based business can apply to earn the standard by showing that they comply with each of these 11 areas. And you can see within that, both directly, there's a focus on staff health and mental health, but also around areas that have a very strong influence. So if you're a London-based business, I'd recommend having a look and considering going for the standard. And if you're not a London-based business, I'd still recommend you have a look, because it's a good practice framework. And if you see the questions asked, you can apply those within your own organisation and maybe identify some positive change. The second one to mention is Mindful Employer, this charter around staff mental health. And scrolling on the bottom of your screen at the moment are the 6 standards that make up the charter. This was developed by an NHS trust in the southwest of England. And the idea is that any employer can apply for Mindful Employer status by committing that they either meet the standard or they're working towards meeting the standard. It's a very low cost to join. For a small business, it's currently £50. For a large business, £200. And the website includes a range of resources, including training, events, and a very handy practical 10-step toolkit. Plus, if you've got Mindful Employer status, you can choose to buy a bolt-on called Mindful Employer Plus. And this has proved very popular amongst small businesses that we support. Let me show you what Mindful Employer Plus is. This is a 24/7 helpline for staff around their mental health. Plus, on top of that, a 12-hour-a-day management helpline to get advice around my staff's mental health. And as you can see, some support around the major stressors that tend to affect people's mental health. So for a business that doesn't have an employee assistance program, this can be a really useful scheme to introduce. And when we mention this on training courses, we always get staff to try and guess how much it costs per employee per year. And we get a range of answers, anything from £50 to £10,000. The most common guess is £1,000 per employee per year. And when that guess is made, they're only £999 out. Just £1 per employee per year. Next up, wellness action plans. And these we found an absolute cornerstone of making a mental health friendly culture. They were created by Mind, the national mental health charity. And a wellness action plan has 10 sections to it. I'll introduce you to 9 out of the 10 in a moment. But first, let me please make the point that, number one, wellness action plans are intended for everybody, not just someone with a mental health issue. Secondly, they're specifically aimed at the relationship between my mental health and my work. So here are 9 of the 10 sections. The first section encourages people to think, what can I put in place around me at work to keep my mental health in a good place? And then secondly, what can management do to help me keep my mental health in a good place? So those first 2 sections are really about proactivity and aiming to thrive in the workplace. Section 3, what are the most likely triggers for mental health decline for me? Section 4, if my mental health was to decline, what impact would that have on me as a person and my ability to do the job? Section 5, what about my working style and my temperament? Maybe when I'm at work, I have a style that's very resilient, very robust, and it's a protective factor for my mental health. Or maybe my temperament at work is more fragile than that, in which case potentially my working style might become a risk factor for my mental health. Section 6, those triggers that we mentioned earlier. What can we do to minimize or remove them from my world of work? And then 7, 8, and 9 are about if my mental health does decline. First of all, what warning signs can I pick up on? What warning signs can my colleagues, my managers spot that might suggest that I'm struggling? Section 8, if that happens, how would I like management to respond? And section 9, if that happens, what can I do? And then there is a section 10, which is really a catch-all question of, is there anything else that's relevant to this plan? And we really encourage anybody and everybody at work to create a wellness action plan. Not only can we sit down and think, what is the relationship between my mental health and work? But also, if I'm willing to share this with my manager, what a great tool to ensure regular conversations about my mental health. Remembering back to the start of this webinar, only 13% of people are comfortable talking about their mental health issues at work. Wellness action plans can be a really strong way of changing that number. Finally, we have Access to Work. Access to Work is a multi-million-pound fund owned by the Department for Work and Pensions. And this is a fund available to ensure that people with a disability or a health condition can thrive in the workplace. Now, I was talking to you earlier about the Equality Act and making reasonable adjustments. Here's the difference between reasonable adjustments and access to work. If someone discloses that they've got a disability, then as a result of that, both the employer and the employee or job applicant should work together to identify what adjustments might be needed. If they're reasonable, then those adjustments must be funded by the employer. However, if they're not reasonable due to cost, that's where Access to Work may be able to fund it. And it's worth saying that there are 2 different Access to Work services. The main Access to Work is there mainly around physical disabilities. So this is a fund that can, for instance, purchase the chair, the monitor, the keyboard that I mentioned earlier. But there is also a separate Access to Work mental health support service. And that provides some mentoring for months and can also fund softer support measures. For instance, staff training to better understand my mental health issue and how to support me. Maybe some buddying or mentoring support. If my mental health is such that I can't use public transport for the first few months as my confidence grows, it might be able to fund for me to get taxis. So please do look into this. Do encourage staff to disclose any health issue they've got and look at how Access to Work may be able to fund some of the support required. So 4 resources that may be of use to your organisation, and we provided you with links to the official websites here. You'll be able to access these links and the official guidance links through the PDF of the slides that we're going to be sending you. And if you watch the recording on YouTube, we'll make sure the links are in the description as well. To specifically mention the Wellness Action Plan, you'll notice there 4 different versions in all being mentioned. There is the core Wellness Action Plan, a blank template with guidance notes, plus one for if I'm working from home, and another iteration for hybrid working. Plus on that second bullet point, a fantastic manager's guide that Mind have created on how to deploy wellness action plans in the workplace, how to promote them, and how to use them as a management tool. So please do have a good look through the links, and what you will find as you work your way through the official guidance and the resources I've shown you today is that across the various strands of your organisation, different tools will be of varying use in different ways. So feel free to watch the video back, feel free to use the links, and let's see if we can move that 13% and stick it up where it should be. Let's normalise the conversation. Thank you all for tuning in from everybody at the Working Well Service.